Have you ever done something so bold, so impulsive, that even you couldn't believe it was you? Well, she did. She kissed a complete stranger in front of her ex, just to prove she was over him. But fate had other plans. Heartbreak doesn't always arrive quietly. Sometimes it crashes through the door like a storm, uninvited, unannounced, and unapologetic. For her, it began with something small, a text that didn't sound right, a change in his tone. A missed call he couldn't explain. She had loved him with the kind of faith that makes you blind to red flags because you believe love can fix everything. Every late reply, every canceled plan, she brushed it aside. He's just busy, she told herself. Because when your heart is invested, logic becomes an inconvenience. You'd rather cling to hope than face the truth staring back at you. But the truth has a cruel way of revealing itself when you least expect it. It was a Thursday afternoon, cloudy and cold, when she found out. Not from him, but from a friend, the kind of friend who hesitates before speaking, eyes full of pity. I saw him, her friend whispered, wasn't alone. Those words hit like glass shattering inside her chest. At first, she didn't believe it. Denial was easier. There must be a mistake, she said, trying to laugh it off. But deep down she knew, she had known for weeks. Love doesn't fade overnight, it fades in moments, small, painful ones, that we pretend not to notice until the silence between two people becomes louder than their words. That evening, she went to see him. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. The moment she saw his face, she didn't even need to ask. His eyes gave it away. Guilt has a look, and his carried it like a confession. It just happened, he stammered, as if betrayal was an accident, not a choice. He said he didn't mean to hurt her, that it wasn't serious, that he still cared. Cared. That word stung more than the truth itself, because caring is not the same as loving, and loving is not the same as staying faithful. She stood there, silent, feeling every ounce of her trust dissolve into nothing. The walls she had built with dreams, laughter, and late-night promises collapsed in a single breath. In that moment, something inside her broke, but something else was born too. The part of her that begged for explanations began to fade, replaced by a strange, fiery calm. She realized that begging for someone's loyalty is the loudest way to lose your self-respect. He reached out to touch her hand, but she stepped back. She had spent too long holding on to someone who wasn't holding on to her. The tears didn't fall immediately. They waited, like unspoken words trapped behind a trembling smile. She walked out without slamming the door, without shouting, without drama. Just silence, because sometimes silence is the only dignity left after betrayal. The nights that followed were the hardest. She scrolled through old messages, looked at photos that now felt like lies frozen in pixels. Every memory was a wound she reopened willingly, not because she missed him, but because she was trying to understand how it all went wrong. Was it her fault? Was she not enough? Those are the questions heartbreak plants in your mind like weeds, growing faster than self-love can heal. But somewhere between the crying and the overthinking, a shift began. Pain turned into realization. She had loved him more than she loved herself. And that was the real betrayal, not his cheating, but her forgetting her own worth. Days turned into weeks, and she started rebuilding. Quietly, stubbornly. She smiled at strangers again. She wore lipstick she hadn't touched in months. She played songs she once avoided. Each act of normalcy felt like defiance. Healing isn't dramatic, it's the small victories no one sees. The morning she woke up and didn't think about him first. That was a victory. The afternoon she laughed without faking it. Another. And yet, despite her strength, one thing lingered, that dull ache of unfinished closure. She wanted one chance. Not to beg, not to cry, but to show him that she was no longer broken, that she had turned the pain he caused into power. She wanted to face him again, not as the girl he left behind, but as the woman he could never forget. Little did she know, that moment was coming. Sooner, and in a far more unforgettable way than she could ever imagine. It had been weeks since she last saw him, but the universe has a way of testing you just when you think you're fine. It was a Friday night, her friend's engagement party. She almost didn't go. Crowds, small talk, love songs, they all felt like background noise to the ache she was still trying to silence. But something inside her whispered go. Maybe she wanted distraction. Maybe she wanted to prove to herself that she could walk into a room full of laughter and not crumble. She took her time getting ready. Not for anyone else, but for herself. The mirror reflected a version of her she hadn't seen in months. Calm eyes, a steady smile, and a quiet kind of strength that comes only after being broken and rebuilt. The venue was warm, full of chatter, and music that made people sway without thinking. She smiled politely, laughed when it was expected, held her glass of sparkling water like it was a shield. For a while it worked, until she saw him. He was across the room, standing too comfortably with his arm around the same girl who had replaced her. Her heart didn't break this time. It froze, because seeing the person who betrayed you happy with the person they betrayed you for is a very specific kind of pain. It's the kind that makes your pulse speed up and your stomach twist, even when your face refuses to show it. He saw her too. Of course he did. His eyes widened for a second, a flicker of surprise, maybe guilt, maybe something else. Then, that smirk, the same one that used to melt her, now just made her sick. He whispered something to his new girlfriend, who laughed softly, clinging to him tighter. It wasn't the scene that hurt her, it was the message behind it. He had moved on, so easily, so publicly, as if she had been nothing more than an inconvenient chapter he had outgrown. Her mind screamed to walk away, but her heart whispered no. She wasn't going to run this time. Not again. And that's when it happened. That reckless, wild spark. The kind that only appears when pain and pride collide. She turned her head slightly and noticed a man standing alone near the bar. Tall, calm, dressed in black. He was watching the crowd with mild amusement. The kind of confidence that doesn't need attention but attracts it anyway. Their eyes met for half a second. Not long enough for words, but long enough for instinct. She didn't think, she didn't plan. She just walked up to him, took a deep breath, and before reason could stop her, she kissed him. Right there, in the middle of the room. A kiss that wasn't about love, it was about power. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen from her dignity. The room froze. Time seemed to stop, except for her heartbeat, which thundered in her chest. She pulled back slowly, her lipstick smudged, her breath uneven. The man didn't look angry. In fact, he looked slightly amused, a corner of his mouth lifting in a faint, curious smile. He leaned in and whispered. That was unexpected. His voice was calm, deep, and dangerously composed. She stammered an apology, half embarrassed, half proud. I just needed to make a point, she muttered. He chuckled softly. Well, he said, I think you made it. The words hung in the air, heavy with irony. Across the room, her ex stood frozen, his smug expression gone, replaced by something else, shock. Maybe jealousy. It was delicious. For the first time in months, she had the upper hand. People were whispering, heads were turning, but she didn't care. She didn't feel small anymore. That single act, impulsive, daring, maybe foolish, was her way of saying I'm done being the one who hurts in silence. She turned back to the stranger, thanked him softly, and walked away with her head held high, leaving both men speechless in her wake. When she got outside, the cool night air hit her face, and she finally let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a rush of disbelief. Did I just do that? Her hands were trembling, half from shock, half from triumph. She leaned against her car, laughing quietly to herself. For the first time in forever, she felt alive, not because of the kiss, but because of the courage it took to take her story back. Little did she know, that spontaneous act of defiance, that one reckless kiss meant only to reclaim her pride, was about to change everything. Because that stranger, the man she had kissed without knowing his name, wasn't just anyone. He was about to become a very significant part of her life, and when she would see him again, in the most unexpected place imaginable, her heart would skip not from pain, but from recognition. The weekend after the party felt like a blur, a whirlwind of disbelief, laughter, and occasional panic. Every time she remembered what she'd done, she'd laugh and cringe at the same time. Who even does that? She'd mutter, covering her face with a pillow. But beneath the embarrassment, there was something else, something strangely liberating. For the first time in months, she had done something entirely for herself, something reckless and real. She didn't even know his name, didn't know if she'd ever see him again. And that, she thought, was probably for the best. Some moments are meant to exist only once, beautiful, spontaneous, and untied to reality. Monday morning arrived like it always does, loud, rushed, and unforgiving. She had a new job to start, one she had fought hard to get after quitting the last one during her breakup. She was nervous, excited, and determined to make a good impression. New week, new beginnings, she whispered to herself in the mirror before leaving. Her outfit was sharp, her hair neat, her confidence stitched back together piece by piece. She wasn't thinking about the kiss anymore. She wasn't thinking about him. The stranger with calm eyes and an easy smile. She had filed that night away in her mind as a wild story to laugh about someday. The office building was sleek and modern, the kind that smelled faintly of coffee and ambition. As she entered the lobby, she adjusted her blazer, clutching her bag a little tighter. The receptionist welcomed her warmly and handed her a folder. "You're part of the new marketing team, right? You can head to the conference room. The department head will brief everyone shortly." She nodded, heart pounding with first-day nerves. New faces, new energy, new chance. She took a deep breath and stepped into the meeting room. It was full of people chatting, some typing on laptops, some scrolling on their phones. She chose a seat near the corner, opened her notebook, and reminded herself to stay composed, confident, and focused. Then, the room went quiet. The door opened, and footsteps echoed against the polished floor. She didn't look up at first, just listened to the deep, steady voice that followed. "Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see you all here. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome our new hires and talk about the vision for this quarter." The sound of his voice froze her. It couldn't be. Her pen stopped mid-scribble. That tone, calm, assured, faintly amused, was burned into her memory. She slowly lifted her head, almost afraid to confirm what her instincts already knew. And there he was, the man from the party, the man she had kissed, standing in front of the room in a tailored gray suit, looking every bit the leader he clearly was. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that instant, the ground seemed to shift beneath her. His expression didn't change much, maybe the faintest flicker of recognition in his gaze. But that was enough. Her stomach dropped. Her mind screamed no. No, no, no. Every ounce of composure she had carefully built that morning began to crumble. He continued speaking as if nothing had happened. Not a single crack in his professionalism. "I'm Mr. Adil Rahman, your new director of marketing." His voice was smooth, his demeanor cool, completely in control. She sat there frozen, hoping no one noticed how pale she'd suddenly gone. Every word he said barely registered. Her mind was replaying that kiss in slow motion, her impulsive decision now echoing like thunder in the quiet corners of her memory. Of all people, him, my new boss. The universe wasn't just testing her, it was laughing at her. When the meeting ended, people gathered around him, shaking hands and introducing themselves. She tried to sneak out quietly, hoping to escape before he noticed. But fate, or maybe karma, had other plans. "Miss Khan," his voice called out from behind her. She froze. Slowly she turned around. He was standing there, hands in his pockets, that same faint smile on his lips. "We'll meet again," he said casually, his eyes gleaming with amusement. She opened her mouth trying to form words, but nothing came out. Finally, she managed a nervous laugh. "About that night, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean." He raised a hand gently to stop her. "No apologies needed," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Though I must admit, that's not quite how most people introduce themselves to their new boss." Her cheeks burned. He chuckled softly, clearly enjoying her discomfort but not in a cruel way, more like someone watching a story unfold with genuine curiosity. "Relax," he added. "What happened happened. Consider it forgotten." His tone was kind, reassuring, but that tiny glint in his eyes told her it was anything but forgotten. She nodded quickly, muttered a thank you, and hurried out of the room. But as she walked away, one thing was painfully clear: this wasn't over. Their paths weren't crossing by accident. The stranger wasn't a stranger anymore, and her impulsive act of defiance had just turned into the most complicated beginning of her life. The days that followed were strange. Every morning, she told herself to act normal, to forget that her new boss was the man she had once kissed out of pure impulse. But every time she stepped into the office, her heart betrayed her, speeding up, tightening, whispering reminders of that night she'd sworn to forget. He wasn't just her boss now, he was a constant presence. Calm, composed, unreadable. He didn't treat her differently, not in front of anyone. No hints, no jokes, no strange looks, just polite professionalism. But beneath that polished surface, there was a quiet, knowing tension. The kind you can't name, but you feel. He had a way of speaking that demanded attention without raising his voice. Every meeting, every brainstorming session, she tried her hardest to focus on the work, yet her mind kept wandering. Did he remember the way she'd looked at the party? The way she'd kissed him, bold and trembling all at once? Sometimes, when she caught his gaze across the table, she thought she saw a flicker, a faint amusement, a spark of recognition. But it would vanish as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same steady professionalism that made her question if it had ever been real. One afternoon, during a strategy meeting, He asked her a direct question about a campaign pitch. She stumbled for a second, caught off guard by his voice. He waited, eyebrows slightly raised, that almost smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Miss Khan," he prompted gently, "your thoughts?" The room was quiet. Everyone was looking at her. She cleared her throat, gathered herself, and spoke, confidently, passionately. By the time she finished, the whole table was nodding. He leaned back, clearly impressed, and said, "That's exactly the kind of insight we need." A soft, approving smile followed. The same smile from that night. Her stomach fluttered, not from nerves, but from something she couldn't quite name. That evening, when most people had left the office, she stayed back to finish her presentation. The lights were dim, the city outside glowing softly through the glass windows. She was deep in her work when she heard footsteps approaching. "Still here." His voice was calm, warm, and far too close. She turned to see him standing by the door, hands in his pockets, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. Casual in a way she hadn't seen before. "Just wrapping up," she said, forcing a smile. He nodded, stepping closer to glance at her screen. "You're dedicated," he said quietly. "That's rare." She laughed nervously. "Or maybe I just don't have a life." He smiled at that, not the professional kind, but a real one, the kind that reaches the eyes. For a moment, the air between them shifted. Neither spoke. It wasn't awkward. It was charged. The hum of the air conditioner, the faint city sounds, the soft glow of her computer. Everything faded until it was just the two of them. Then he said softly, "You've changed since that night." Her breath caught. He was looking right at her now, not like a boss, not like a stranger, but like someone seeing her for who she truly was. "You were brave," he continued. "Impulsive, yes, but brave. Most people don't dare to act from the heart like that." She didn't know what to say. Her instinct told her to laugh it off, to change the subject. But something in his voice, in the way he said it, it disarmed her. "I wasn't brave," she finally said, her voice low. "I was angry, hurt. I wanted to prove something." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes, proving something to the world is just a way of finding yourself again." There was a pause, the kind that holds meaning without needing words. She looked away, pretending to arrange her papers, trying to hide the warmth rising in her cheeks. He stepped back slightly, giving her space. "Good work today," he said softly, his tone shifting back to professional. "Go home. Don't let your past define you, Miss Khan." Then he left, leaving her standing there, her heart pounding, his words echoing in her mind. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His voice replayed over and over. "Don't let your past define you." He didn't just mean her ex. He meant the fear, the pain, the doubt she carried like a second skin. For the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, fate had brought him into her life, not to remind her of her mistake, but to teach her something she'd forgotten, how to feel alive again. The next morning, when she walked into the office, something inside her had shifted. The awkwardness was still there, yes, but it was laced with curiosity now. A question that hung in the air every time their eyes met. Was fate playing a cruel joke, or writing the beginning of something neither of them saw coming? It's strange how healing rarely feels like healing. It doesn't arrive as a sunrise after a long night. It's slower, quieter, disguised as small moments that seem ordinary until you look back and realize. That's when I started becoming myself again. For her, healing began in the little things. The morning coffee she made without rushing. The way she began humming again while driving to work. The small smile that came naturally instead of being forced. For months, she'd felt like a stranger in her own skin, walking through life with her heart locked behind walls built from heartbreak. But now, piece by piece, she was unlocking the door again. Work helped. It gave her rhythm, purpose, direction. But more than that, it gave her space to grow beyond the person she used to be. Every challenge, every deadline, every presentation forced her to trust herself again. And yes, he was part of that journey. Her boss, her stranger, her reminder of how unpredictable life can be. But what surprised her most wasn't how she felt about him. It was how he made her feel about herself. He never pitied her, never treated her like someone fragile or broken. When she spoke, he listened. When she hesitated, he waited. His quiet confidence mirrored something she had lost, and now was slowly finding again within herself. One evening, after a long presentation that she'd worked on for weeks, he called her into his office. She expected notes, maybe feedback, maybe a critique. But instead, he simply said, "You've done well. You've changed this department in ways you probably don't even see yet." She blinked, caught off guard. "I'm just doing my job," she replied, but he shook his head. "No," he said. "You're rebuilding yourself, and in the process, you're raising everyone else around you." There was a quiet conviction in his tone that disarmed her. For a moment, she didn't see him as her boss. She saw him as someone who understood her beyond words. Someone who saw strength where others saw scars. That night, she sat by her window, city lights flickering like distant stars, and thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the kiss, the twist of fate. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle she had once hated, but was now beginning to understand. Maybe she had to lose herself to find herself again. Maybe the pain wasn't punishment, but preparation. Every tear, every mistake, every impulsive decision had led her here. Stronger, wiser, more aware of her own worth. She realized something important. She didn't need revenge to prove her value, and she didn't need love to feel whole. Her worth was never defined by who left her. It was defined by how she chose to rise after being broken. Still, the irony wasn't lost on her. She had kissed a stranger to prove she was over her ex, and that stranger had turned out to be the one who showed her what true respect, patience, and connection looked like. It wasn't about romance, not yet. It was about recognition. Two people crossing paths at the exact moment life was teaching them both something. He had seen her at her most impulsive, her most vulnerable, and still, he'd treated her with quiet grace. That, she realized, was rare. And it taught her something far greater than love ever had. That not everyone who walks into your life is meant to stay forever. But some are meant to remind you who you really are. As weeks turned into months, the tension between them softened into understanding. There were still moments. Glances that lingered too long, silences charged with words unspoken. But there was no rush, no pressure. She was no longer chasing validation, she was building confidence. Every day she carried herself a little taller, smiled a little easier, and forgave herself a little more. The girl who once kissed a stranger out of anger had evolved into a woman who could look in the mirror and see strength, not shame. She had finally learned the lesson life had been trying to teach her all along. That closure doesn't come from confrontation, and confidence doesn't come from revenge. It comes from reclaiming your own story, from refusing to let pain define the chapters that follow. And maybe, she thought, the universe wasn't cruel after all. Maybe it was poetic, giving her heartbreak, then giving her the chance to turn it into power. And though she didn't know it yet, her story wasn't done, because fate had one more surprise waiting, one more test to see just how much she had truly learned. Life, she realized, isn't a straight line. It's a circle, full of detours, wrong turns, and unexpected destinations that somehow lead you right where you were meant to be. For so long, she had believed that pain was punishment, that being betrayed was a sign she wasn't enough. But standing where she was now, stronger, calmer, and free, she understood that pain wasn't the end of her story. It was the push she needed to begin a new one. Sometimes, life has to break you just enough so that light can slip through the cracks. Sometimes, you have to lose the person you thought you needed to find the one you were always meant to become. She often thought back to that moment. The night of the party, the kiss that started everything. What once felt like a reckless mistake now looked different in hindsight. That kiss wasn't about proving anything to her ex. It was a declaration, a silent, desperate cry from a woman who refused to stay small. That one impulsive act had rewritten her entire story. It had led her to her new path, her new self, and to someone who, without realizing it, had become a mirror for her growth. The man she had once kissed despite her past had ended up standing beside her as she built her future. Fate, she thought, truly does have a sense of humor. But the greatest surprise wasn't fate. It was her. The version of herself that had risen from heartbreak was someone she didn't even know she could be. She had learned that strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It's showing up for yourself every morning when no one else does. It's forgiving yourself for the things you did when you were hurting. It's learning to let go of the need to be understood by those who chose to misunderstand you. She no longer sought validation from others because she had found it within. The woman who once questioned her worth now carried it in her walk, her words, and her silence. Her ex, at some point, reached out, as they always do, when they sense your peace. He wanted to meet, to talk, to clear the air. She agreed, not out of curiosity, but closure. When she saw him, she felt nothing. No anger, no longing, just calm. The same man who once held the power to break her now looked like a faded memory, familiar but distant. "You've changed," he said quietly. She smiled. That's what pain does, if you let it. And with that, she walked away, not to prove a point this time, but because she finally understood she didn't owe anyone an explanation for her healing. Her silence was her victory. Her peace was her power. At work, things had settled into something almost poetic. She and her boss, the man who had unknowingly walked into her story at its most chaotic, shared an unspoken understanding. They didn't need to talk about that night anymore. What mattered was the respect, the trust, and the quiet friendship that had grown between them. Sometimes, their eyes would meet across a room, and a small smile would pass between them. Not romantic, not heavy, just real. It was as if they both knew that their connection wasn't about the kiss, it was about timing. They had met at the exact moment they were both meant to learn something. About courage, forgiveness, and second chances. And in those moments, she realized that every story, even the messy ones, carries a message. Hers was simple but powerful. You cannot control how people treat you, but you can control how you rise after they do. She had learned that heartbreak doesn't destroy you, it reveals you. It strips away all the illusions until you meet yourself, raw, unguarded, and real. The woman who once stood trembling at a party, trying to prove she was over someone, now stood tall knowing she didn't need to prove anything at all. Because healing, she discovered, isn't about forgetting the past, it's about being grateful that it happened. Because without it, she would never have met herself. So when people asked about her story, she didn't tell them about the cheating, or the kiss, or the twist of fate that followed. She just smiled and said, sometimes, life breaks your heart just to remind you that it still beats. And in that simple truth lay the beauty of her entire journey. Not one of revenge, but of rediscovery. Not one of pain, but of power. She had walked through fire, yes, but she had walked out glowing. And though her story wasn't over, she had already written its most important chapter. The one where she finally became the hero of her own life. And so, when she looked back, at the heartbreak, the chaos, the kiss, and the countless moments that tested her, she didn't see tragedy anymore. She saw transformation. Because life didn't just happen to her, it happened for her. Every wrong turn had secretly been guiding her toward the person she was meant to become. The girl who once stood trembling in pain had evolved into a woman who could stand in power. Not because she never fell, but because she always got back up. She no longer blamed fate for the storm. She thanked it for teaching her how to dance in the rain. She no longer asked, "Why me?" Instead, she smiled and said, "Thank you for the lesson." And perhaps that's what life truly is, a collection of unexpected moments that break us just enough to rebuild us stronger. The betrayal that once felt like her ending had actually been her beginning. The kiss that seemed like a reckless mistake became the key that unlocked a new chapter. The stranger who entered her life by chance became a reminder that even after heartbreak, connection and kindness still exist. So if you ever find yourself standing where she once stood, lost, hurt, unsure if you'll ever heal, remember this: sometimes the universe removes what you thought you wanted to make space for what you truly deserve. Because in the end, she didn't just get even. She got better. And that was her sweetest revenge of all.